You are listening to Book Clips, a mini podcast where authors and narrators introduce you to lesbian fiction. You can find a buy link and more information about this book in the show notes. Enjoy!
Dreams Unspoken by R.J. Layer. Narrated by Etter. Jo had told her mom she wouldn't be coming for Sunday dinner because of her company. But Cecile returned at 10 the following morning, earlier than expected, and sped off shortly thereafter with Callie. Now she didn't have an excuse to stay away. Her dad was in a particularly foul mood, more so than usual. So as soon as she helped her mom to clean up after dinner, Jo left. Back at the farm, overwhelmed with sadness, she was in the barn about to saddle up for a ride when she heard a car. Steeling herself for a tense conversation with Kate, she was more than pleasantly surprised when she stepped outside to instead see a familiar black station wagon. Maria stopped the car at the edge of the drive where Jo met her, bridle in hand. "I'm sorry. I should have called first. I'm interrupting." Maria didn't meet Jo's eyes, looking instead at the bridle Jo held. "No, you're not interrupting, that is. I told you to stop by any time." Jo raised her hand. "Let me put this away." She rushed into the barn, tossed the bridle on her saddle in the tack room, and stopped only a moment to rub Cobalt's nose. "Sorry, buddy. Maybe later." The horse snorted his dissatisfaction. Maria was standing by the fence outside the barn when Jo returned. "Why do you suppose I'm afraid of horses? I've never been hurt by one." Jo cocked her head and regarded Maria closely. She seemed sad today, kind of like Jo had been feeling herself. "Some people are afraid of heights, others the dark. I don't know, but I think we all have fears." Maria fixed her eyes on Jo's. "And what does Jo Marchal fear?" The intensity in Maria's eyes seemed to reach into Jo's soul. She averted her eyes and looked out over the pasture. She shrugged, knowing the answer to Maria's question all too well, then masked the hollowness she felt by flashing a smile at Maria. "Would you like to get over your fear?" "Exactly what are you suggesting?" "Let me introduce you to Daisy May." Maria's eyes widened. "She's the gentlest horse I've ever been around in my life, and I've been around a lot of horses." Maria remained wide-eyed and motionless. Jo continued to smile and tipped her head toward the barn. "Come on. I promise you'll be safe." Maria nodded slowly, but she didn't move. After Jo placed her hand lightly on her back, she finally took a tentative step toward the barn opening. "Your farm is named for her?" Maria's voice was timid. "You said there was a story you'd tell me." Maria stopped dead in the barn doorway, and no gentle urging got her to move. Jo stepped in front of her and took her hand. "I promise I won't let you get hurt. Do you trust me?" Eyes still wide, Maria nodded again, but she still didn't move. Jo pulled gently on her hand and started her story. "Daisy May is the reason I got my horse farm in Kentucky. One of her colts was a Triple Crown champion 7 years ago." Jo stepped backwards, slowly pulling Maria along with her. "She's the most laid-back, easy-going horse I've ever known. That's where the lazy part of the farm name comes from." Jo stopped in front of Daisy's stall. When the horse dropped her head over the gate, Maria sucked in a startled breath. "It's okay. See?" Jo rubbed under the horse's chin, but Maria refused to move. "I bet you liked to wear pretty dresses when you were a young girl, didn't you?" Maria's nod was almost imperceptible. "Did you ever have one of those fancy dresses made of velvet?" Maria answered with another tiny nod. Jo rubbed her thumb over Maria's hand. "Close your eyes." Maria's eyes grew huge again. "It's okay. I won't let anything happen to you." Jo placed her other hand over her heart. "I promised, remember?" Maria swallowed and closed her eyes while Jo continued to stroke her hand. "Remember how soft that dress felt to your touch?" Jo touched Maria's fingers to Daisy May's nose. so soft you couldn't keep from rubbing your fingers over it. Joe felt Maria's arm relax as she moved her fingers over the horse's nose. Joe smiled. See? She's as harmless as that little dress you had years ago. Maria opened her eyes, jerking her hand away when she realized what she was touching. When she tried to step back, Joe caught her arm. Maria, she won't hurt you. Look. Joe grasped Maria's hand lightly and raised it, feeling it go rigid when Daisy pushed her nose beneath their joined hands. She likes this soft part rubbed. Joe stroked the fingers of her other hand over Daisy's nose. Maria tentatively touched her fingers to Daisy May's nose. The horse pressed against Maria's fingers and snorted. Maria jumped back so abruptly she nearly fell. Joe caught her arm to balance her. She really likes that. She was saying thanks. Daisy May rubbed her neck on the gate, so Joe stepped back over to scratch her. Good girl, she cooed. She looked at Maria. She'd never hurt a soul. She doesn't even spook. Maria stood back, watching. For as tough and strong as Joe Marchal appeared, she'd just witnessed how tender she truly was. That seemed only to further complicate what she was feeling when she was around her. Joe faced her. I'm sure this isn't what you drove out here for today. Maria crossed her arms tightly over herself. No, but it's all right. Are you okay? I'm fine. Maria tried to make her smile convincing. Joe stepped over to her and touched her elbow. Let's get something cold to drink. Maria didn't uncross her arms until she stepped from the barn into the afternoon sun. In the kitchen, and seated at the island, beer in hand, Maria noticed the gift basket, which still contained the bottle of wine. Haven't found a lady friend to share the wine with yet? The question was nosy, but she had an unstoppable desire to know if Joe was seeing someone. Why? She couldn't answer definitively. She only knew that she did. Joe looked at the basket. I've been a little busy, she shrugged, preoccupied with other things. Maria took a sip of beer and glanced around. Obviously not with your living quarters. No offense. She smiled. Joe responded with a mock smile. Obviously. I could help you unpack and organize your things. And get a better sense of who you are, Joe Marchal. That's very generous, but I'll manage it one of these days. One might wonder if you're planning on sticking around. Oh, no, I can't leave. I have to... Joe stopped. Maria didn't miss the color shift in Joe's eyes. Everything okay? Couldn't be better. Joe's smile was forced. She reached across the counter that separated them, touching her hand. If you ever need to talk, Joe, I'd be happy to lend an ear. As the words left her mouth, Maria hoped that Joe wouldn't ever have a need to talk about any of her female relationships. She wasn't sure she could listen to her talk about the women in her life without feeling... what? Jealous? She couldn't imagine for the life of her why she would feel jealous. Joe nodded and picked up her beer. Let's sit out back. The deck is still shaded now. The day was warm, but a steady breeze blew out of the west. It was soothing looking out over the pastures and farm fields that gave way to the woods of the reserve. Joe sat silently, trying to focus on happier thoughts, like the way Maria's hand had felt in her own out in the barn. But her dad's mood and his harsh words earlier, to not only her but her mother, kept pushing everything else out of her mind. It dawned on her that she and Maria's son had more in common than their love of animals. Both of them had a father who was absent in too many important ways. She wanted to let it all out, have a good cry and be done with it. But even thinking about doing so made her feel so vulnerable. Maria broke the silence. I feel like there's something weighing on you, Joe. I wish you felt comfortable enough to talk to me. Joe glanced over at her. Maria's face showed the tender caring she showed with her son. It's nothing, really. She attempted a smile. I'm not sure I believe you, but you hardly know me, so I understand your reluctance to talk. Maria's dark eyes threatened to melt Joe's resolve. She hadn't told anyone about her dad. She'd only shared with Tom and Cecile that he was sick. But recalling now at how upset she'd been when driving home earlier brought tears to her eyes. She turned away. Maria was silent. A single tear escaped and dropped into her lap. Jo swallowed the lump burning in her throat. My dad is dying. She exhaled a deep breath. And the stubborn old fool is determined to go to his grave, hating his only child. Maria looked over at Jo, her heart aching, as she watched a steady trickle of tears run down her cheeks. This big, strong woman had all the heart she had guessed from the first introduction to her son. She wanted to put her arms around her and hold her the way she did with Matt, to offer the comfort of a consoling embrace. Instead, she simply reached over and grasped Jo's hand where it hung off the arm of her chair. I'm so sorry, Jo. She squeezed gently, holding on a moment longer. I mean it, Jo. If you ever need to talk, I'm only a phone call away. Jo glanced over at her. Thanks. Dreams Unspoken by R.J. Layer. Narrated by Etter.
This was an episode of Book Clips, a mini podcast where authors and narrators introduce you to new books with a short reading. Get the book now by clicking on the buy link in the show notes. This link works for Amazon US, UK and Canada. If you use our links, we earn a small commission from Amazon. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to this podcast.